Hi everyone. This is the third lecture on the digestive system. In this lecture, we're going to review the hepatic portal system, which you might have covered in the laboratory of SCB 203. And we're going to include the final major structural area of the digestive system, which we have not talked about yet, and that is the large intestine. So as we said, we'll review the hepatic portal system. We'll talk about the structure and the function of the large intestines, and some of the basic mechanisms involved in defecation. We're going to reserve the neural innervations for the next lecture, and the final lecture on the digestive system, which will be lecture 24. So you learned about the hepatic portal system in SCB 203. As you know from 203 that a portal system, which we also discussed about in the endocrine system, connects two capillary beds together. So it kind of forces the blood to the second capillary bed. So many of the digestive organs combine together to the hepatic portal vein, so that it can take many of the blood that contains many of these absorbed nutrients to the liver so it can be processed before the cells can use it. So many of the veins of the digestive organs merge with the hepatic portal vein to form a capillary bed in the liver. Because of this, we call the hepatic portal system the gatekeeper of abdominal circulation, because just about many of the blood areas must go through the hepatic portal vein to get to the liver. And this is important because the liver has many functions, which we'll talk about a little bit later in a different lecture. But for now, some examples of its functions are the storage of glucose, the production of proteins, formation of new glucose, detoxification, and processing of products from the red blood cell destruction. And so, briefly, the hepatic portal system includes vessels such as the splenic, gastric, and superior and inferior mesenteric veins that merge and drain into the hepatic portal vein to the liver. So notice these are all veins. Okay. So we see in this diagram of the hepatic portal system that most of the blood from the abdominal organs goes directly into the hepatic portal vein right here. You can see that they're all converging together. Okay, from the superior mesenteric, the splenic vein, the inferior mesenteric, as well as the gastric veins, to here the single vessel, the hepatic portal vein. The hepatic portal vein then branches into a network of sinusoidal capillaries in the liver. This is where nutrients, toxins, products of red blood cell degradation are processed by the hepatocytes. Remember, the liver cells are called hepatocytes. Okay. And the nutrient-rich blood from the digestive organs and the spleen is delivered to the hepatocytes by the capillaries of the hepatic portal system. Finally, the processed blood exits through the hepatic veins and joins the systemic circulation. Okay. So now you remember that veins are named after the organs that they drain. So the hepatic veins are leaving the liver into the inferior vena cava. Okay. Now we can begin our discussion of the large intestine. Now the large intestine is very obvious because it borders the abdominal cavity and frames the small intestine on the lateral sides and the superior side. Okay, so here's a diagram of the large intestine. You can see how it frames the small intestine, and of course it's connected together by the mesentery in between. And here the small intestine has been removed. Here are some of the functions of the large intestine. Okay, it receives undigested and unabsorbed material from the small intestine, forming the feces. Okay, it absorbs water and electrolytes. It maintains fluid and electrolyte and acid-base homeostasis. It secretes mucus, promotes propulsion and defecation. and contains bacteria with functions such as vitamin synthesis. So even though we haven't spoken much about the large intestine as of yet, it has many important functions. Let's look at the gross anatomy of the large intestine. It has three sections: the cecum, the colon, and the rectum. Okay, so here's the cecum that connects the small intestine to the large intestine, and you can see that attached to it is the lymphatic tissue called the vermiform appendix. And then it's composed of the colon, in which there's the ascending colon, the transverse colon, descending colon, and then a curved part called the sigmoid colon, and then finally the rectum. Okay, so as you mentioned, the colon is divided into four parts: ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colon. So here I made a brief table demonstrating that even within a single structure of the digestive system, it may be intraperitoneal within the peritoneal cavity, or it may be outside of it and be retroperitoneal. The ascending colon is retroperitoneal, the transverse colon is intraperitoneal, the descending colon is back again retroperitoneal, and finally the sigmoid colon is back to intraperitoneal. So it kind of alternates. And here are the four parts of the colon. Finally, the rectum is also retroperitoneal, and it's anterior to the sacrum. So here's the rectum right here. Now, the rectum itself ends at the anal canal and opens at the anus. So it's the very terminal section of the digestive tract. It has valves that allows passage of flatus or gas without passage of feces. And as many of you can expect, this might be a very important function. It's composed of an involuntary internal anal sphincter and a voluntary external anal sphincter. So here's the rectum, here's the anal canal, and the anus is the opening, and it has both an external anal sphincter and an internal anal sphincter. Okay, so the internal anal sphincter is involuntary, and the external anal sphincter is voluntary. Now, the large intestine has very unique histology, much different from other parts of the gastrointestinal tract, which we've talked about earlier. It doesn't have villi, it doesn't have microvilli, and because of this, it suggests that absorption is not a major function, but it has many goblet cells. So again, no villi or microvilli reflects the nutrient absorption is not a primary function. But having many goblet cells suggests that it produces mucus to provide a protective and lubricating function as the formation of feces moves throughout the colon and the rectum. Now, the large intestine has unique bands of the muscularis externa called the tinea coli. Okay, and the tinea coli is then bunched up into little pockets called haustra. So in this picture here, we see these muscular bands called the tinea coli, and that these form little pockets called the haustra. And haustrum is a single one. The large intestine harbors many bacteria that are part of the normal flora. So it consists of about 500 different bacterial species that coexist in a symbiotic relationship. Okay, so remember, a symbiotic relationship means that the host provides a benefit to the bacteria, and the bacteria provides a benefit to the host. So that's what a symbiotic relationship is. And so these bacteria provide a number of useful functions. For example, here are some examples of the functions of the normal bacterial flora. It produces vitamins such as vitamin K. Without bacteria, we won't be able to synthesize vitamin K. It metabolizes undigested materials such as soluble fibrous carbohydrates. It also prevents the growth of harmful bacteria. And also they stimulate the immune system. Now, the large intestine, part of its function is for motility and for defecation. And so during the motility involves segmentation or churning and mass movements called peristalsis in the proximal large intestine. Okay, this is a new term. We can divide the large intestine into functional regions. Okay, these functional regions can be called the proximal large intestine and also the distal large intestine. So before we mention the functions, let's describe what areas of the large intestine belong to each. The proximal large intestine includes the ascending colon and the transverse colon. The distal segment of the large intestine includes the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and the anal. So this is how the large intestine can be divided into proximal and distal segments. Now, functionally, we can assign functions for each of these two areas. The proximal segment of the large intestine is the primary site of water and electrolyte absorption in the large intestine. Okay. It is also the primary site of bacterial activity. The distal segment, there's still a small amount of water absorption occurring, and I'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later in the lecture. It also stores the fecal material until defecation. Okay, so this is the functional segments of the proximal and distal segments of the large intestine. Now let's look at the motility of the proximal large intestine. We mentioned it exhibits segmentation or churning of each haustra, and it's controlled by the enteric nervous system, local neurons, and triggered by stretch. Motility of the proximal large intestine involves mass movement or mass peristalsis occurs. The haustra undergo peristalsis to propel contents to the distal large intestine. This is stimulated 3 to 4 times per day and is triggered by food consumption that initiates these enteric nervous system reflexes. Motility of the distal large intestine is not as great as in the proximal large intestine. Okay. Mass movements force fecal material into the rectum to initiate parasympathetic defecation reflex. So defecation is under the parasympathetic control. So let's look at the summary of the structures and functions of the alimentary canal. Okay, so now we can include everything from the oral cavity to the large intestines. And so this summarizes everything we talked about so far and describes their structural properties as well as their functional roles. Okay, so this is something you might want to review for the next test. Okay, let's move on to absorption of water, electrolytes, and vitamins, as this is a major function of the large intestines. Okay, now these also occur in the small intestine, probably to a greater extent, but these are important functions of the large intestine. Let's talk about absorption of water. Okay, water moves by osmosis, so it's the movement of water from an area of low solute concentration to an area of high solute concentration. You had to learn this in SCB 3. So this gives you a quantitative kind of appreciation of the absorption of water. We take in about 9 liters per day of water that enters the small intestine. Okay, of that 9 liters, 2 liters are ingested, through the oral cavity, and 7 liters is secreted by accessory organs. So to me, this is pretty amazing that we secrete more fluid than we ingest. Okay. So out of this 9 liters, 8 liters is absorbed by the small intestine. So by far, the majority of the water is absorbed in the small intestine. Most of the remaining water is absorbed by the large intestine. And what's left? What's left from that original 9 liters is about 100 milliliters, or 0.1 liter. And this water is excreted in feces. So there's a small amount of water that has to be that's obligated to be removed in the feces. Okay. Let's look at the absorption of electrolytes. Okay. Electrolytes use both co-transport and active transport mechanisms. Okay. Most are absorbed in the small intestine, and the rest is absorbed by the large intestine. How about the absorption of vitamins? Vitamins are dietary chemicals required for metabolic reactions. Okay. They were originally named because they had amines on them, amino groups, and that were vital for life. But later on, they found out vitamins were not all have amino groups, but they still kept the name vitamins. Let's look at the absorption of vitamins. Vitamins are divided into water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins. Okay. Eventually, a little later, you're going to know the names of all the vitamins, but for now, we'll keep it simple. So most water-soluble vitamins are absorbed in the small intestine by diffusion, okay, because they can dissolve in the water. One exception is vitamin B12. Okay, vitamin B12 requires it bind to what's called the intrinsic factor in order for it to be absorbed. Okay, intrinsic factor, as you recall, was produced by parietal cells of the stomach, and it binds to vitamin B12 to be absorbed in the large intestine. The fat-soluble vitamins, there are 4 of them, are vitamins A, D, E, and K. So I usually memorize these 4 because all the rest are water-soluble vitamins. These are packaged in the cells with fats and other lipids, as we saw for lipid absorption.